We are deep in the golden age of DOS gaming in 1993 as one of the greatest games ever made is released, and I'm not being hyperbolic about that either. So, in the year where Manchester United began their reign of dominance in the new Premier League, England needed to beat San Marino by 7 goals to advance to the World Cup in 1994, and they went on to win 7-1. Here is Hollywood heartthrob Jeff Goldblum describing Graham Taylor's time as the England manager.
That is one big pile of shit.
I'm the Geeky Dad, and this is a history of PC gaming. In a dystopian future where governments have failed and are being replaced by corporations, Sorry, hang on. Let me just turn off the news. In a dystopian future where governments have failed and have been replaced by corporations, you control your corporation's agents as they seek to control the world supply of chips. In 1993, Bullfrog came out with their first game after Populous that wasn't a god game. Syndicate was a cyberpunk dystopian squad-based strategy game. In the game, the players take control of a small squad of cyborgs who need to complete various missions to win control of territory and to make your syndicate all-powerful. At this point in Bullfrog's history, Peter Molyneux had sold the company to Electronic Arts and also had been made vice president of EA as well as a CEO of Bullfrog. As a result, he wasn't as involved in the creation of all Bullfrog games, and Syndicate was a game in which he wasn't involved at all. It is perhaps because of this that Syndicate is not as well remembered as other Bullfrog products where Molyneux has had a guiding hand. It was released to a lukewarm reception initially, however, as time progressed, the game press has had a more rose-tinted view of the game. Syndicate has made a lot of best PC gaming lists at the turn of the decade. This could be due to the success of the game's sequel in 1996, or the general good name of Bullfrog made up from its other releases, many of which are about to appear in this series of videos. One of the things that stands Syndicate apart is it's an example of a game which embraced the burgeoning cyberpunk aesthetic which few video games had embraced to that point. Shadowrun on the SNES was released in the same year, and many other video games in the future would go on to embrace cyberpunk. During 1993, LucasArts continued their dominance of the point-and-click adventure market by releasing 2 excellent point-and-click adventure games. The first of these was Sam & Max Hit the Road. Both Sam & Max come from a comic much loved by the developers of LucasArts. In fact, they were used as test characters in the Scum development suite. New developers to the team were given Sam & Max characters, as well as a scene for them to get to grips with LucasArts' Scum engine, used to develop all their point-and-click adventure games. Sam & Max made a number of innovations to the Scum engine, including a cut-down interface and actions wheel, instead of a long list of verbs for the user to choose their actions from. Another innovation was the removal of text-based dialogue choices, as the development team felt nothing moves a joke quicker than reading it before it's delivered. Sam & Max was a modest commercial success, however it was well liked by critics at the time. It came runner-up to Star Wars Rebel Alliance in the Annie Awards, a film and animation award, in 1994 for Best CD-ROM Animation. However, as the years have progressed, Sam & Max has gained a cult status as a classic of the point-and-click age, spawning an episodic sequel from Telltale Games. The second point-and-click adventure from LucasArts is a personal favourite of mine. One of the earliest point-and-click adventures I can remember playing and falling in love with. Day of the Tentacle was a sequel to the seminal Maniac Mansion released by LucasArts 6 years prior. This was the first game that Tim Schafer and Dave Grossman were lead developers on after working on Scum-based games since The Curse of Monkey Island. The two teamed up to produce a game full of humour, wit, and an interesting game mechanic involving time travel. I remember in one particular puzzle, you had to solve it by putting some wine in a time capsule, then digging it up 200 years later to turn it into vinegar required to power a battery. Day of the Tentacle was also the first LucasArts adventure game to feature a full talking soundtrack. Day of the Tentacle was much better received than Sam & Max. The game won Computer Gaming World's Best Adventure Game. Multiple critics in the gaming press of the time fawned over the style and writing in the game. Computer Gaming World said, "Calling Day of the Tentacle the sequel to Maniac Mansion is a little like calling a space shuttle the sequel to a slingshot." Personally, I love the game and have fond memories of playing it with my dad. One of the greatest technical achievements of the game was he could play the entire version of Maniac Mansion within Day of the Tentacle itself. To do so, you go up to Weird Ed Edison's room and play Maniac Mansion on his Commodore 64, which is so cool. Both these titles helped cement LucasArts' legacy as the daddies of the point-and-click adventure market, and that dominance would continue until the genre began to fall out of fashion with the game buying public after Grim Fandango. In 1993, LucasArts released their first ever Star Wars game. It seems incredible that a company set up as the video game arm of Lucasfilm took 11 years since their inception to release a Star Wars game. Broderbund had held the license to make Star Wars games until 1992, when the license reverted back to the parent company. Lead designer Lawrence Holland decided to utilise his experience making World War II combat simulators and produced X-Wing. Holland also made an early decision to build the game using polygon graphics rather than bitmap sprites, common to video games at that point. X-Wing was one of the first games to use polygon graphics, a method which is still in use today to make video games. The game is based in and around the events of A New Hope. You play a pilot in the Rebel Alliance based on a Mon Calamari star cruiser. From the cruiser, you flew missions in a variety of spacecraft available to the Rebel Alliance. A-Wings, Y-Wings, and the titular X-Wing were all available for the player to use across 14 missions. The experience of playing the game was much more simulation-based than previous successful space combat games such as Wing Commander. You could manage the power levels of your shields, lasers, and engines. Diverting power to shields and lasers made you slow down. Diverting power to engines made you faster and more vulnerable. You could also change where the power in the shields was going to, so you could bolster your forward shields for a head-on charge into the enemy. X-Wing was a much bigger hit than LucasArts was expecting. The 100,000 units initially sent to stores sold out during the debut weekend. By the end of 1993, 500,000 units had been sold. One of the best things players and reviewers saw in the game was its level of immersion. The flow of the menus set up like the inside of a Star Destroyer, going into the briefing room before the mission started, and then into the cockpit of your fighter built a sense of immersion in the Star Wars universe. The game also won a number of awards, including Computer Gaming World's Simulation of the Year 1993 and Electronic Entertainment's Game of the Year 1993. 1993 had one of the most monumental PC games ever released. id Software released a game that would completely change not only the PC gaming landscape, but the entire gaming landscape. Doom was released and popularised the first-person shooter genre. It was so popular that first-person shooters were called Doom clones for a long time after the release of Doom. This list is much too brief to fully explore how impactful Doom was on the gaming landscape. Luckily, I have a separate video series which will do just that. Check out Games That Changed the Game. WTF is this? A game for Macs? Out, vile spot! However, perhaps with it being the best-selling PC game until 2002, we should probably take a look at what made Myst so popular. Myst was an adventure game, but not in the same vein as the ones described earlier in this video. Myst was an adventure game in the first person, and unlike the Scum adventure games, the interface was the user directly clicking on objects within the first person view. To progress through the story, the player must complete a series of puzzles presented on screen in various areas. As the player progresses, the story of the Islands of Myst is revealed to the player via pages collected during the puzzles. The game was unlike other adventure games as the first person perspective and little interface differed greatly from games where sprites were controlled on the screen. Myst sold millions upon millions of units worldwide. However, the critical opinion on the game was split. Some reviewers praised the graphical fidelity of the game and enjoyed the open-ended nature of the puzzling and emergent story. Some reviewers found the game lacking many mechanics behind all the flashy graphics. Next Generation were big critics of the game, calling it gaming's darkest hour, and stating the static graphics and purely trial and error puzzles epitomised poor game design. Whew! Tell us how you really feel, Next Generation. Computer Gaming World conversely stated that Myst, unlike other CD-ROM games, which were high on glitz and low on substance, Myst is everything it's touted to be and is quite simply the best Macintosh CD-ROM game. Myst has a very strange specific memory for me. My mum worked as a teacher in Bradford, and the school where she worked was full of Macs. As a result, there were a lot of Myst demos floating around. Occasionally, I'd have to go into work with her, and I remember playing Myst on the school's Macs and not really enjoying it. However, every time I see the box art, I'm immediately transported back to a specific classroom in a school in Bradford that no longer exists. Still, Myst was a bit rubbish, wasn't it? Since Maxis released SimCity in 1989, they had released multiple Sim games, but none of them had reached the level of success that SimCity had. As a result, Maxis felt pressured to release a sequel to the city building game, and in 1993 that sequel was released. SimCity 2000 was a collaboration between the original SimCity creator Will Wright and Fred Haslam. However, Haslam took much more of a lead role in the development. The game expanded on what came before, giving players greater control over tax revenues and a brand new perspective on the city. Maxis used an isometric view similar to the Maxis published A-Train from 1990. They also added lots of new buildings, new amenities and new transport options. Although not as seismically impactful as its forebear, SimCity 2000 was a well-received game, selling over 1 million of units in the first 5 years after launch. It was also successful in gaining awards, winning the 1993 Best Simulation Cody, which was the 5th time in a row that Maxis had picked up that award. It also won Best Military or Strategy Computer Game of 1994 at the Origin Awards. It narrowly lost out to X-Wing for Electronic Entertainment's Game of the Year in 1993. As a youth, I tried many times to get into SimCity 2000, however I could never seem to vibe with it in any way. I played it much later, probably around 1999, and had played numerous other city builder games prior which I had enjoyed more. However, I remember friends of mine who at the time were obsessed with the game and had massive sprawling metropolises. Metropolisi? What's the plural of metropolis? SimCity is a much beloved franchise, so much so that it was one of 14 games added to the Museum of Modern Art's permanent collection of video games. So clearly I've got terrible tastes. So that was 1993. Do you have any fond memories of PC gaming from this era? Perhaps you enjoyed Doom. I mean, of course you enjoyed Doom, everyone enjoys Doom. Or maybe like me, you're a big fan of LucasArts point-and-click adventures. Please leave me a comment down below, like and subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you guys in the next one.